Chapter 21, from 1824 to 1836. Section 10. Van Diemen's Land was divided into counties by Governor King in 1805. An imaginary line was drawn across the island from east to west midway, Buckingham being on the south and Cornwall on the north. Macquarie made sections more minute by a running survey. In 1826, letters patent were issued, constituting Edward Dumar Esquire, Chief, and Roderick O'Connor and Peter Murdoch, Assistant Commissioners for the survey and valuation of Crown lands. They were instructed in delineating counties, hundreds, and parishes to observe the natural boundaries and recognized nominal limits. The parishes were to contain about 25 square miles. On this task, they were 10 years employed, but their valuation became available so soon as one parish was proclaimed. The names assigned to the various localities are commonly welcome to the British ear, though occasionally productive of confusion. The Colonial Office published in 1824 the conditions on which land would be granted. The notice contained 18 clauses and formed the basis of subsequent regulations. The Secretary of State, however, reserved a discretion in special cases. The parishes were to be surveyed, valued, and sold for cash at a discount of 10%, or credit at 4 quarterly installments. 9,600 acres was the maximum allowed one purchaser. Free grants were offered to emigrant capitalists, not more than 2,650 acres, nor less than 320, a quit rent of 5%. On the value of the land deferred 7 years and redeemable within 25 years at 20 years purchase. One half the value was to be spent in improvements on pain of forfeiture. Additional grants were restricted to such as possessed the means of cultivation and subject to a quit rent from the date of issue. A more ample explanation of the views of the Crown issued from Downing Street, April 26, 1826. The conditions of sale were the same as in the notice of 1824. Purchasers of land were now promised the return of their purchase money, conditionally, that during 10 years they could relieve the Crown from an expense 10 times its amount, by the employment of convicts, rated each £16 annually. One half this amount was offered in the redemption of quit rents on the same conditions. Or, when convicts were not attainable, by expending 5 times the value of the grant, one half the quit rent would be extinguished. Grants in extension were promised 2.5% value on improved value of an original grant, on which 5 times its value should be expended. Or, having so improved his first purchase, the settler was permitted to buy a second at half price. By an order published at the Horse Guards, 1826, officers willing to emigrate, not under the rank of captain, were permitted to sell their commissions. 1/3 of the price deposited with the Crown, to be repaid on their arrival and rated as their capital, gave them a title to free grants. In 1827, the convict clause was withdrawn. The settler was required to produce £500 capital for each square mile he claimed. Earl Bathurst suggested to the Commander-in-Chief and to the Lord High Admiral that it was desirable to promote the settlement of naval and military officers in the colonies. Circulars were accordingly issued from the Horse Guards and Admiralty in 1827, stating the terms on which free grants might be engaged. Officers of 20 years' standing were exempted from quit rents, those of 15 years' standing for 20 years, of 10 for 15 years, and of 7 for 10 years. The extent of their grant was made to depend on their capital, but they gave bonds for residence and non-alienation during 7 years or until, upon a grant of 500 acres, valued at 5 shillings, £25 were expended. These offers drew a large number of settlers, both civil and military. More than 500 grants, exceeding 500 acres, were issued in 4 years ending 1831. Fictitious schedules of property were sometimes presented, and persons without capital were enabled by monetary loans to deceive the governor. Dollars, borrowed for the purpose, were lodged in the banks to the credit of an applicant. A considerable breadth, comprehending a succession of valuable farms, was parcelled out among several settlers, in virtue of a single bag of dollars hired for the purpose. The Act of Parliament authorised the subjects of Great Britain to visit the settlement of New South Wales without any licence whatever. Persons intending to emigrate usually applied to the Secretary of State for permission and an order for a grant. Their references being satisfactory, They received a letter to the governor directing that land should be given them proportionate to their means to bring the same into cultivation. For some time, the settlers for this colony were obliged to visit New South Wales to obtain the requisite permission. To avoid the expense and delay, some entered on lands provisionally assigned them by the Lieutenant Governor, but were in danger of being dispossessed by an applicant at headquarters. To obviate these evils, power was conferred on the Lieutenant Governor to locate such as might arrive. Applications from residents were received only at stated periods, and when the herds were exhausted by loans and the stores by the issue of rations, were indefinitely postponed. But such as brought orders from the Secretary of State were accommodated at once. The newly arrived emigrant, distrustful of reports or ignorant of the nature of the country, usually went out in search of a home. He was received with hospitality as a guest, but found himself unwelcome as a neighbor. Often, after long travel, he would scarcely find a spot within an accessible distance unclaimed. "All that is mine," was the common answer to his inquiries. A present of sufficient value removed many such obstacles and gave the wanderer a clue to a desirable resting place. Such as were too dull to comprehend this process of discovery often lost much time in unavailing toil. End of chapter 21, being chapter 3, from 1824 to 1836, section 10.